Which conspiracy theory is so believable that it might be true? Story 1. Jeffrey Epstein is a Florida billionaire who probably is running an underage sex trafficking ring. Edit. Well, Epstein just got arrested for trafficking minors, so this is more a conspiracy fact, not a theory lol. A brief background. In 2007, dozens of underage women came forward saying Epstein was having sex with them in Florida. They also claimed that he passed the girls along to other elites and ran a X-ring blackmailing service kinda. Trump, Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, and Prince Andrew are all known associates of Epstein and would go on his plane dubbed Lolita Express to a private island in the Caribbean. What happened next was ridiculous. Epstein hired the best legal team ever. Like as good as Audrey Dershowitz was involved in all that. Acosta was the prosecutor against Epstein, and he is now appointed by Trump and his cabinet. Acosta gave Epstein the plea deal of his life. He was found guilty of one charge of sex with a minor, in spite of being accused by dozens of girls, and had to register as a sex offender. He got 13 months in jail, but he only served 10. Here is the kicker. He could leave jail 6 times a week to go work at his at-home office. He was supposed to go to prison, but stayed in a local jail for some reason. He was granted immunity. All co-conspirators in the case were given immunity. This means that if further evidence comes out against other people with the case, they can't be prosecuted again. His house butler was found guilty of obstruction of justice regarding the evidence against Epstein. He got more jail time, years, than Epstein. The police commissioner on the case stepped down because he thought it was rigged. Miami Herald said it was the deal of a lifetime. Epstein is now free and still has billions of dollars. Acosta has told friends that he was scared to go against the powers that be because they would squash his career. This all happened in 2008. I think the DOJ just reopened the case last month due to fuckery going on. Clinton and Trump, among other famous people like Kevin Spacey, have been documented flying on Epstein's plane to his infamous Lolita Express. A Miami judge just ruled last week literally that Epstein's case was illegal and violated law because Acosta did not consult the victims before bringing the plea deal. Story 2. The Laurel Canyon Conspiracy. Basically, if you look at the counter-culture revolutionaries in the music industry, in the 60s, most of them were the children of military intelligence people. So, the theory is that the free love, lots of drugs movement they inspired was done intentionally to distract the youth from a full-scale revolution. The thought was, if the angry youth of the mid to late 60s were too high and getting laid all the time, they would stop caring as much about societal ills and then basically sleepwalk through the 70s, which they did. I stumbled upon this when I was reading up on Jim Morrison and how his father was the one who called in the fake strike at the Gulf of Tonkin that kicked off the Vietnam War, and which was shown later to have been a false flag. Turns out a lot of his contemporaries were also children of highly placed military people with ties to intelligence. Strange that they all wound up in Laurel Canyon as part of the same movement. Story 3. That your phone's microphone is constantly hot and it's listening for keywords to target advertising. Most glaring instance where this happened to me was when I walked into a colleague's office. He had just gotten a standing desk, but one that goes on top of his existing desk rather than a standalone. Pun. Model. That's important to note. I said, nice standing desk. When did you get that? Thanks, just today, he replied. That was literally all that was said about the desk. We talked about work-related stuff, and as I walked out and checked my phone, there was an ad on Facebook for that exact model of standing desk. I have never owned one or Googled one before. Yet there it was on my feed. Tinfoil hat be damned, they listen in. Story 4. Facebook purposely attempts to ruin people's relationships because the drama gets more views, and more views sell more ads. Several years ago, they introduced a feature so that your comments on other pages would show up in your friends' feeds, So if you're secretly an atheist and you comment on some atheist page, it shows up in your devout Southern Baptist Grandma Muriel's timeline, even though it's a conversation that has nothing to do with her, and there's no reason for it to be. As a result, Facebook outs you to your family, and Grandma is typing away at all the evil Satanists trying to corrupt her grandson. And if you comment on a public post, it's unavoidable. You used to be able to control who could see your comments even on public posts by other pages. But at the same time, Facebook introduced their tattletale feature. They took that ability away. Now, if they were to stumble across the same page, they'd be able to see your comment. But after that change, Facebook started pointing everybody you know directly to it. Not to mention, the privacy settings are difficult to find, difficult to understand, and with each passing year gives you less and less control over who sees what. By forcibly combining everybody's social circles, Facebook is trying to generate conflict. They want to generate conflict because the conflict happens on Facebook, which means people logging onto Facebook more often and seeing more ads. They're essentially an internet tabloid, except instead of showcasing the personal drama of celebrities for clicks and sales, they're doing it to you instead. Ever notice how the vast majority of family drama, relationship fights, etc., these days happens on Facebook? That's by design. Facebook is literally destroying the social fabric to make a buck, consuming relationship stability like it's an oil refinery consuming crude. Story 5. I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory at this point, but a lot of people still don't acknowledge that your internet searches and social media profiles area absolutely being used as training models by major IT companies. I was a drunk college student and had access to them to run AI training. If you still think you're off the grid, you're an idiot. Being frank, it's not a big deal if you don't have dark shit to hide. Those people are too busy building the new technological world to give a shit that you look at midget porn. But don't delude yourself to think people don't have access to anything you do on the internet. Story 6. That the world's one participate in a global human sex trafficking ring that is untouchable by any law enforcement and often results in the deaths of any who dare expose it. This also extends into a larger world of high-profile crime that is hidden to the world. It is likely that celebrity suicides are often staged to cover up murders related to this secret world. Those with a history of mental health issues are especially easy to cover up. The murders of Honey and Barry Sherman come to mind when speaking of this theory. They were a billionaire couple from Toronto, Canada, who were murdered in their home, which had been staged to look like a murder-suicide. The police initially corroborated the story of a murder-suicide until after the children of the victims gave a public statement saying the police were wrong, stating it was instead a double homicide. Using a private investigator, they revealed evidence in the crime scene that made it clear it was a double homicide. This raised questions as to why the official police statement said it was a murder-suicide. For example, both victims were found bound and a belt that did not belong to either of the victims was found around Barry's neck. Their murder happened in December 2017, and there has been very little information released about this case since. Story 7. The CIA was involved in selling crack to low-income black neighborhoods to fund activities they couldn't get approved by Congress. I mean, I'm pretty sure most people believe there was some involvement, and it's just a matter of degree. But I think they were nuts deep in directly smuggling and selling crack through intermediaries to black communities with full knowledge of the Justice Department and executive branch. Edit, dudes, I just want to clarify the fact that the CIA was involved in some degree of drug smuggling is generally considered a well-attested fact. The degree to which they were involved in the proliferation of crack, the motivations behind this, and the degree to which the presidents knew of and condoned or even ordered all of this is a little more debatable. Story 8. My personal theory is that this is intentional as a method of control. We know that there are kingmakers in the industry. If Disney or Universal backs your music career, you're going to be a star regardless of your talent. Same goes for most other industries. So some of the bigwigs have an eye for talent with an exploitable weakness. Someone you can feed an illegal vice to when they're playing by their rules, and then leak a tragic horror on if they go off script. Used to be homosexuality, but fortunately, that became socially acceptable. So now it's pedophiles and other sexual abusers. I'm not 100% convinced on this, or rather, I'm not convinced it's a conspiracy. It could be that many people in the industry have all found out independently that it's easy to control sexual predators once they're in the spotlight. But it does seem oddly convenient that there are so many of them in Hollywood, more so than other industries. Story 9. That William Shakespeare never wrote any of the works that have been attributed to him. I don't think I believe the theory 100%, but the lack of evidence to support him as a writer is amusing. William Shakespeare was born, lived, and died in a small town that consisted of not much more than sheep farmers. His father made sheepskin gloves, certainly not the life that would have contributed to the knowledge of the many royal topics of Shakespeare's works. Surely, the true author of Shakespeare's works would have had the means to travel and learn of all the worldly topics that his works were based on. We do know that he did own the Globe Theatre, and that he did work there as an actor. There is no record of his attendance at any schools. He was raised in an illiterate household. Both of his parents signed all legal documents with a mark, a sign of illiteracy. There are 6 surviving signatures of Shakespeare. All of them look as if a 4-year-old wrote them. They were all most assuredly written by an illiterate person. All of the signatures were found on documents such as a mortgage contract and his will. There are no surviving original written literary works written by Shakespeare. There are no surviving personal letters written by him. Surely a letter written from Shakespeare would be coveted as prized possession, surely destined to survive to the present day. Mozart's handwritten letters professing his desire to poop on his cousin's face have survived to this present day, but not a single letter written by William Shakespeare. The only surviving written documents, written in his hand, were his will and few other small pieces. All pieces of his writing that have been found were all written in secretary hand, a very basic form of writing, typically used by poorly educated people. There are no surviving official documents that recall him as being a writer in any way. All official documents state that he was a businessman and a real estate owner. Shakespeare's will made no mention of any assets related to writings, books, or anything of that nature. All these facts paint a picture of a scenario where someone paid William Shakespeare to use him as a pseudonym for their own writings, and perhaps used his position as the owner of a theater as their own personal venue. The best theory about the true authorship was Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford. He was well known to be a gifted poet and playwright. He was also known to sponsor companies of actors, and he was a patron of some of the most well-known leaders. Oxford would not have been at liberty to write about the topics found in Shakespeare's works. The only compelling evidence that I've heard from Shakespeare supporters are anecdotes written years after his death by people who knew Shakespeare and referring to him as a writer. I don't find this compelling at all. If Shakespeare made an arrangement to act as the author of someone else's works, surely such an arrangement would require Shakespeare lie to everyone. I'm certain that all his friends thought he was a writer. Story 10. I have long argued to friends and family that Barack Obama may have been a CIA operative sometime in between college and being a community organizer in Chicago. Bear with me. After graduating from Columbia in 1983, Obama went to work for a company called Business International Corporation, a company that is known to have been used as CIA front in the past. There is little information available about this time in Obama's life. The CIA was actively recruiting at that point in history and would have been very interested in a young black man with an Ivy League education and ties to Indonesia and Africa. The information would most likely still be classified, but it could also have helped his rapid accession in politics at such a young age. After nursing this theory for a while, I finally Googled it, and sure enough, loads of websites tout similar theories. Some of it convincing. Not the stuff about him being a CIA chrononaut who fought Russians on the moon. That angle is less convincing. Story 11. I don't watch the historical shows that purport that Hitler escaped to Argentina instead of killing himself in his Führerbunker. However, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence that can line up one after the other to possibly link him, or someone else escaping to Argentina. Now, of course, I believe the historical record. Hitler was very sick, crazy, etc., and ordered Germany to burn, as it was clearly not meant to win the war. He wanted to be the captain to go down the ship. He wanted his body burned, so the Soviets couldn't parade it, throw Berlin, and then cart it off to Moscow. Hitler knew what happened to Mussolini and his body and didn't want the same fate. But there is some interesting evidence to suggest he escaped. A lot of theorists overlook this chain of events for some reason and go for more extreme and less plausible escape methods. But here's mine, based off actual fact. April 26, 1945, Hannah Reich, a female test pilot, somehow manages to land her small plane on a highway outside of the Führerbunker as Soviet Red Army soldiers are shooting at the plane and as the Soviet Air Force has a ring around the city. During the later part of the Battle of Berlin, somehow she makes it in. What was her mission? Her mission was to bring the new head of the Luftwaffe, Robert Ritter von Grimm, to Berlin to be officially given his orders and appointment as head of the Air Force after Hermann Göring had been sacked by Hitler for what Hitler believed was an attempted coup to take over as the new Führer and run Germany from his Alpine retreat. To me, this seems an extreme measure to appoint someone as the head of an air force that practically only existed in name. Von Grimm was slightly wounded on landing. Grimm and Reich spend a day in a hafe in the bunker. April 28, 1945. The pair are given cyanide capsules and a new aircraft. Room is made for them to take off of one of the main Axis highways. They fly north. Before they depart, a third person supposedly joined them in their aircraft. A man in a German army. Here, officer's uniform with a trench coat pulled up and collar practically covering his face, and his officer's slouch hat pulled down as low as possible. No one got a good look as to who it was. All military officials were accounted for in the bunker. Grimm is said to have been dropped off in Flensburg, the soon-to-be new head of the Nazi government in the far north of Germany. But Hannah did not stay long and flew for Denmark and/or Norway. No official records but eyewitness reports. Denmark and Norway were completely still under Nazi occupation and had U-boat bases still in operation. A few days later, Hannah Reich flies back to Flensburg, and that's where she surrenders with the rest of the Nazi government a few weeks after the war had officially ended. Around this time in early May, a few days later, and a few days before the end of the war, two U-boats left for Argentina. 530 and U-977. Both U-boats surrendered not far off the Argentine coast on July 10, 1945, 2 months after the war in Europe had ended. One of the U-boats was fitted for passengers and cargo. Some of the official documents and logbooks were destroyed and never recovered. The crew of the boats plead ignorant of the end of the war, but had differing stories of why they were going to Argentina. So this shows an escape route to Argentina for Hitler, had he chose it. Now, we must not forget Martin Bormann, the head of the Nazi Chancellery, our party secretary and confidant to Hitler, had been funneling Nazi funds to Argentina for years. Even before the war, Argentina was only neutral in name, but financially and politically allied with the Nazis. For many years, people thought it was Bormann who escaped Berlin and not Hitler. However, Bormann was purported to have been witnessed dying in the attempted breakout of the bunker Etchenery area, along with the head of the Hitler Youth, Arthur Axmann. The bodies were dumped in a shallow grave. The myth continued, but many years ago, DNA evidence confirmed that Bormann did die in the Battle of Berlin. Soviet blunders. There was a corpse of one of Hitler's body doubles shot in between the eyes lying in the street. The Red Army thought it was Hitler at first, but upon further analysis by Smersh A. and Kiev, the body was not Hitler, but his double. The bullet hole was from a German rifle. Interesting, Hitler's remains were burned and charred, but not enough gasoline was found to immolate the remains, so some bits remain like the jaw and bits of skull. These remains were shipped around over years. Recently, an American team was allowed to examine a piece of the skull and the couch where Hitler shot himself in Moscow. The skull fragment with an exit wound was that of a female in her late 20s, early 30s. So possibly Hitler's brief wife, a longtime mistress, Eva Hitler, Nebron. But she supposedly bit a cyanide capsule and did not die of a gunshot wound according to the historical record. The blood on the couch also proved to be female without a trace of male blood. Rewind. In the 1970s, the rest of Hitler's remains were further cremated and either dumped in the Elbe or Oder River. Even the Soviets weren't sure which, so as he could not be mad a martyr, and so he didn't have a final resting place. Sounds a little suspicious. The vast majority of the survivors of the bunker who were interrogated were loyal to Hitler and were close subjects. They were mostly S personnel or loyal maids and secretaries, and all had slightly different stories. Their stories are by far biased. Of course, they could lie for Hitler. The only really credible witness to suggest Hitler was in the bunker around the time he died was Siegfried Nappa, who I believe was a major in the army at the time, and was briefly at a command meeting in the Führer bunker because he was aiding the commander of the Berlin Military Defenses General, Weidling. I have read his book, and he seems a credible source, and he talks of how outraged and unhinged Hitler was. This was just an army soldier doing his duty, and was not a political person who was associated with the party. But that's one out of dozens of reports that is possibly unbiased. So as you can see, there is something there. Some very coincidental evidence to suggest Hitler could have escaped to Argentina. But in reality, he probably did kill himself in the bunker, although Eva Hitler may have killed herself differently. Story 12. This is my understanding of the Joker war veteran theory. A truckload of soldiers gets blown up. Nobody panics because it's all part of the plan. The Joker was a soldier. He was sent on an illegal armaments mission approved by the government when terrorists sabotaged his truck. Boom! This would have killed most, if not all, of the soldiers present. Yet he survived. He was found by the terrorists and taken captive, brutally beating him and carving a smile into his cheeks. This explains his desensitized and confident aurora in the Where Are They Seen. Being an illegal venture and hearing news of how terribly wrong it went, the government decided to tie off loose ends and completely wipe any proof of the squad's existence. Credit cards, birth certificates, fingerprints, etc. This made the Joker completely untraceable, a man that never existed. During this time, the Joker would have experienced mental and physical torture. This and the probable lack of food would have caused him to experience severe delusions. He would have spent a large amount of time sitting alone in the dark, and the lack of human contact would have forced him to spend his time lost in thought. He would have obsessed over the fact that he was abandoned in a foreign country, abandoned by the very same country he swore to serve and protect. This caused anger and deep-seated resentment for America. If I was in that situation, I'd be freaking vexing. Anyway, after somehow escaping from his captors, he returned to Gotham to wreak havoc in an effort to introduce a little anarchy and get revenge on the people that fucked him over. Story 13. We could be in a simulation. Simulation theory poses the idea we all live in a simulated universe. And perhaps we may even be simulations ourselves. This science fiction storyline is not as hypothetical as it first seems. Some of the brightest minds of our time are the main proponents behind this unusual idea, and the debate surrounding the theory grows daily, with many disciplines of science and a wealth of human philosophy combining to create a persuasive conundrum that would seek to question all reality and the bounds of consciousness. We'll cover the intriguing premise of the main hypothesis and the unfolding of the simulation theory debate. The hard evidence presented by those who espouse simulation theory point to numerous discoveries, breakthroughs, and known unknowns over varied scientific disciplines. The work of physicists in the fields of string theory and quantum mechanics are referenced, as are the noted thought experiments of Erwin Schrödinger and Thomas Young. But outside the theoretical, the notion we exist inside a matrix-style artificial construct brings with it the questions of natural evidence. And here citations of James Gates and the Fibonacci sequence speak of mathematical, geometric, and even programming code inherent in the nature of reality. We'll talk about all the biological and physical evidence and cutting-edge science of artificial intelligence and virtual reality that underpin the simulation theory. Story 14. The Illuminati. Seriously, at the end of the day, most every major company in the world is owned by an international, unbelievably large corporation. And there are maybe 20 of them that own the vast majority of wealth in the world. It's not the same image of a group of rich white men around a table playing with the world, but it is close enough that I would argue their essence is the same as the Illuminati. Especially in Western countries, not sure about Eastern ones, but imagine it's the same. You can't be a complete ethical consumer because at some point you will run into the big company that holds other companies that do sketchy things in foreign countries. It's simply impossible. In one turn or another, you will be financing unethical behavior, but I still believe in reducing the most we can. Story 15. Aliens have been visiting Earth. Outgoff has on record been documenting sightings since the 1960s at least. 2017 just spent $23 billion on a UFO program as well. Harvard psychologist John E. Mack studied over 200 abductees who had already been through other psychiatrists who found no pathos, only to find extremely similar and detailed stories from people all over the world. Mass sightings like Phoenix Lights, where even the governor admits that it needs to be looked into. Heavy government control to this day over anything metal detected near the site. The Roswell crash supposedly happened. You can look up entire compilations of the main media channels like Foxconn, etc., making jokes about aliens like, they really go out of their way to make it a joke. Plus, the universe is 40 billion years old. Humans have been evolving for what? 6 million years. You think we're the only planet with life in the universe? If not, do you realize other species have had 40 billion years longer than us to evolve? Physicists say there is probably around 11 dimensions, and we only know 3. Come on, guys. There will never be any hard evidence. Do we leave hard evidence and indicators that we were present when we study an animal? Is it in our interest to inform species that we exist and are studying them? Story 16. Pablo Escobar worked with the CIA. They were involved in the drug trade. This is confirmed by his son. Their reason of working together was the fight against communism in Central America. They were working together in sales and importing cocaine to the States. The CIA's role was exposed in 1996 in an investigative series, Dark Alliance, by Gary Webb for the San Jose Mercury News. The investigation headed up by Webb revealed ties between the CIA, Nicaragua Contras, and the crack cocaine ravaging African American communities. This investigation severely damaged the intelligence agency's reputation and launched a number of federal investigations. Things didn't end well for Webb. Major media led by the New York Times, Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times worked to discredit his story, and he lost his work and died in 2004 from an apparent suicide. Officials would later come forward to back Webb's original investigation up. Senator John Kerry even released a detailed report claiming not only was there considerable evidence linking the Contra effort to trafficking of drugs and weapons, but that the U.S. government knew about it. Story 17. There's that one that says that the Twin Towers in Building 7 actually fell because of tactical thermonuclear devices embedded in their bedrock foundations. It sounds ridiculous at first, but nuclear bombs were actually submitted as a potential demolition solution, something which you have to submit when you apply for the permits, whatever to build a building in nice, or so I've heard. The way I heard it explained was that it would essentially be a shape charge in the bedrock that, when detonated, would blast hyperheated gas up through the center of the building, vaporizing the vast majority of the material up through the core of the building, weakening it enough that it would just collapse in on itself and turn to dust. Also, the positioning of the explosives would ensure that Building 7 could also be demolished at will in the same way, with the nuclear device removing most of the internal structure and only a few demolition charges needed to finish the job. So basically, the buildings would vaporize from the inside and turn mostly to dust, collapse in on themselves with very little resistance and almost no actual structure remaining, free-falling into their own footprints. And the basement levels of the buildings and below would be filled with molten metal and rock for months after the fact. If you go back and watch the collapses of the towers in Building 7, it is bonkers how they look compared to other controlled demolition. Also, and possibly the most interesting little nugget in all of it, the Twin Towers collapse location was called Ground Zero. Ground Zero only refers to two things: the place where the Twin Towers collapsed or the site of a nuclear explosion. It is legitimately the only explanation for the Twin Towers collapse that explains everything, or very nearly everything, perfectly. Story 18. MLK was assassinated, but not by James Earl Ray. First off, let's not forget that James Earl Ray was literally an escapee from prison for nearly a year by the time he had killed MLK. Second, let's consider the fact that James Earl Ray was a petty thief and not a good one at that. A year before the murder, he flew all around the world, even though he was wanted because he was an escaped prisoner. You think the airport would have a pic of him, right? Nope anyways. He continues to move around from the US to Mexico to the UK, until he finally came back to the US, still no problems. All of a sudden, he comes up with enough money for plastic surgery and gets his nose done. In the matter of some months, he went from trying to become a bartender to trying to kill MLK. Cool. But then it happens and he gets arrested and confesses. Well, he's already fucked, so why care, right? But 3 days later he says, oh nah, fuck that. I ain't doing this shit by myself. Hell, it's a guy named Raul that helped me. To be honest, he was the mastermind. Well, time goes on, and after screeching on his claims, of course the courts come up with the fact that Ray killed ML. That should be it. Right. Well, MLK's son Dexter King talked to Ray and asked him did he kill his father, and Ray's answer was still no. Keep in mind that this was 1997, a year before Ray died. Why still lie? If he was really racist, why would he deny something so significant to all the racists in America? Hell, he was probably the most loved person by the white community back then. Then, they had a mock trial because the King family felt that Ray didn't act alone, and there was something bigger to be sought out. Well, the mock trial acquitted James Earl Ray, but not only did they acquit him, new names appeared in the case, and one of those names is Lloyd Jowers, a restaurant owner in Memphis at the time. Now, this man admitted that Ray was a scapegoat and that he paid a police officer to take the kill shot. In an episode of ABC's Primetime, Live Jowers admit to a reporter that he was paid by a mafia member to make sure the assassination happened. Coretta Scott King v. Lloyd Jowers had a jury find that Jowers was in fact a part of a conspiracy to kill MLK, and the assassination involved others, including government agencies. Take this info however you want to, but deep down y'all know damn well his assassination was much deeper than what the Department of Justice tried to make it. Story 19. Port Arthur, Tasmania, Australia. April 1996. Not in chronological order. The accused Martin Bryant, 29, mental age approx 11, supposedly orchestrated this massacre single-handedly. Bryant, left-handed, not comfortable with guns. Minimal experience. The shooter, right-handed from the hip, claimed 29 headshots in the first seconds, leaving one in the chamber for a magazine change, then continued shooting. Bryant supposedly called in a hoax heroin drop to decoy police to a remote location. Nobody knew the new and unlisted number of the police station. Eyewitnesses were certain It was Bryant after the newspaper eyed him the next day. Eyewitnesses, locals who knew Bryant, said it was not him. Those witnesses were ignored. The shooter was observed in a vehicle at the historic site toll gates with 3 other people. He was arguing with one of them. He then walked around the vehicle to retrieve a rifle from the rear passenger side, walk back, and shoot them all. The witness to this said it was not Bryant. Police were called circa 1330 hairs, but responders were ordered to halt for several hours, so they stopped and had a BBQ. A 22-body morgue truck had been delivered just a short time earlier. Overkill for such a small, remote location. It was disposed of a short while later. After the shooting, the shooter traveled a short distance to Seascape, a holiday location, and was under police siege at circa 1830 hairs, who then fired the 3 gunshots at Port Arthur at the same time. Bryant pleaded not guilty for over 6 months whilst being held in solitary. His lawyer was dismissed and replaced by another who had been a police prosecutor. This replacement then coerced a guilty plea by offering Bryant some prison concessions. Amongst other things, the NSW State Premier Barry Unsworth had stated at a meeting prior to the incident, "We will not have uniform gun laws in Australia until there is a massacre in Tasmania." Australian law stipulates that a coronial inquest must be carried out where a foreign national is involved. The Prime Minister, John Howard, overrode this law and put a 30-year embargo on evidence. There are many more unanswered inconsistencies. The official Port Arthur story has more holes than a pastafarian's colander. Story 20. I love conspiracy theories, so I'll give the most recent credible one I've heard. The rainbow-haired rapper Tekashi 60. 9 was actually a government plant used to get dirt on the rap gangster scene industry. Seriously, there would be nothing special about Daniel Hernandez, but throw some face tats, ridiculous hair, and liberal use of the N-word, and baby, you got a stew. Now in his rise to fame, he had to solidify his street cred, leading him to also join Treeway, a blood gang. So now both feet are solidly set. This stupid motherfucker pushes fentanyl, is involved in robberies, multiple other felonies, including his previous pedophilia case, which was also controversial. There was also a pretty well-known beef between Chief Keef and Teriyaki 60. 9 and Chief Keef, I would assume, could also be a ploy for the feds. In addition, 69 did a bunch of stupid shit like run up through Keef Hood IARC, basically daring Keef to react. And anyone with half a brain or who actually grew up in a hood knows how stupid that is. Yet nothing happened to 69. Almost immediately after 69 gets taken in on a F. Enrico charge. Another well-known rapper, 20, One Savage was arrested for overstaying in the U.S. on an expired visa, which expired when he was 14 IRC. He has since been released, and the Gov basically admitted they made a mistake, something which nearly never happens. Then another rapper, Melly, gets arrested for a double homicide, which has its own conspiracy theory as well, which is mostly that Melly is schizophrenic. Now, if all this wasn't enough to make you go, 69 is basically getting all charges dropped and will be put into witness protection. For the shit he's accused of, he should first off not be walking away scot-free, let alone witness protection, but he is either snitching on everybody or this is the Gov's way of saving face. I'll leave it up to you whether you believe it or not.